What time do you have? We can start now. Okay. Good morning, colleagues. Let me welcome you to the second introductory session of the Climate Smart Agriculture webinar series. This morning we have Steve Maxime, the C-SAC specialist or Climate Smart Agriculture Compliance Specialist, presenting first, and he'll be followed by Kirsten Fleming, the Climate Specialist from CARDI. The sessions we will run similar to how they were ran yesterday. So Steve will present. I'll give a brief introduction to Steve. And after Steve's presentation, Kirsten Fleming will present. I'll give a brief introduction to Kirsten Fleming. Each presentation will be no more than 20 minutes. And after the both presentations, we will have a question and answer session for about 50 minutes. So I will start the session by introducing Steve Maxime. And before Steve starts his session, I will ask him to just give a brief insight into what took place yesterday. And similarly, I will ask Kirsten Fleming to give a brief insight into what took place yesterday. And that is particularly for the participants who were not present at the session yesterday. So off we go. Steve Maxime is a plant pathologist by initial training. He's an EU-recognized senior expert on climate smart agriculture and was amongst the first agricultural scientists addressing climate change concerns during the Caribbean Planning for Adaptation to Climate Change project in 1997. He has conducted training sessions on comprehensive climate smart agriculture for several nations, nationals, regional and international organizations. A former UNFAO climate change advisor in the Caribbean and the current science advisor to the Association of Caribbean Media Workers, he developed the Trademarked Climate Smart Agriculture Compliant Training, Certification, and Auditing tool. I will now share my screen. So Steve, you can go ahead now and share my screen here.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Let me just get cracking here. Can you verify that you can see my screen?
I can't see it.
Sorry?
I can't see it.
You can see it, okay.
I can see it, yeah, I can see your screen.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'll proceed. Welcome again, colleagues. I've been asked to give a quick review of what transpired yesterday. As part of my introduction, we got into a conversation about what prompted climate smart agriculture, how do we define it, why is it ignored in certain circles, including the GCF, what is so different about this webinar series and our concentration on knowledge building. We said that there were a number of problems associated with national scale adoption of climate smart agriculture, including incomplete articulation of a truly comprehensive climate smart agriculture, a unidimensional design and implementation and an evaluation framework, no prioritizing tool against greenwashing, and we spent some time on greenwashing yesterday, the loss of mitigative contributions from CSA towards the nationally determined contributions, which we also discussed yesterday, and the fact that there's no locally verifiable eco-linked quality labeling standard that came up as well. I went on to hint that the solution to those issues could be found in this C-SAC, Climate Smart Agriculture Compliant tool, which is an auditing, training, and even a self-certification, a self-evaluation tool that farmers can use. And we had comments from a farmer in the audience, as an attendee, who verified that you can in fact use it as a self-assessment tool. So let me just spend a little time talking about what this C-SAC thing entails. So climate smart agriculture by definition is meant to improve food security, and I've underlined some of these issues. To improve food security and agricultural productivity, increase the resilience of farming systems to climate change by adaptation, whilst capturing potential mitigation co-benefits. So what C-SAC does, it separates climate smart agriculture, if you like, into 5 operational arms. So we talk about resource conservation in terms of adaptation, energy use, which has a mitigation and agricultural productivity components. We talk about safety, which involves food security primarily, biodiversity support as a means of adaptation and food security preservation as well, and greenhouse gas reduction, which is purely mitigative. Under the rubric of resource conservation, the Climate Smart Compliant tool looks at land use, water use, nutrients use, including the source of those nutrients, whether they're from fossil fuel based, etc. Labor, how labor is being used, the energy consumption in labor. We look at energy use as a separate subcomponent where we look at power. Where's the power used on the farm coming from? What's the source of lighting? Input manufacture. So you might be using agrochemicals and so that have been produced from non-renewable sources, and we factor that in as well. Your transportation on farm and in terms of deliveries. In terms of safety, we look at production operations, harvesting, storage, and utilization. And with regard to biodiversity support, we look at your land clearing methods, what type of offsite agrochemical impact there is, the limit, how are you limiting the introduction of invasive species or the proliferation of invasive species? Have you fiddled with ecosystem services impact in the sense that have you interrupted some of the either water catchment or other biodiversity linked issues or support mechanisms within the environment? Greenhouse gas reduction. What level of enteric fermentation is associated with your project? Whether you have ruminants on site or not, what are you doing with the manure and the organic fertilizers that you have procured or produced on farm? What happens in terms of your soil management? How have you maintained that carbon and nitrogen balance in the soil so that you have not added undue amounts of greenhouse gases? Fossil fuel use, which is fairly straightforward. And then we look at manure and waste management. So although we looked at enteric fermentation in the case of livestock projects, and I know that it came up yesterday, but this C-SAC tool has a special categorization that can handle livestock projects or mixed projects, and how you dispose of your waste, whether you have generated waste at all. Because in a truly climate smart operation, the waste should be at a minimum because your waste is really a byproduct. It's either going to be used to incorporate into your composting and your soil incorporation, etc. Now, I've literally raced through this because, as we discussed yesterday, we are not about just the sharing of information. That can be done in any webinar setting. You can do that at home by yourself. What we are attempting to do here is to provide information that you will then interrogate during the question and answer session. And we really develop that nexus between information and knowledge, as we discussed yesterday. So we know that there's some data out there. We are providing you with bits of information. When we interrogate that information together, hopefully we'll be able to add to your knowledge portfolio. And with that understanding, you would make wise decisions on your farm or as regards policy, etc. So as I said, I'm racing through to be sure that I do not exceed the 20 minutes and that I do in fact give you enough time to interrogate the information that I'm sharing. Now, these slides and a lot of the background material will be shared with all attendees, and you have over the course of the next 5 weeks for us to thoroughly interrogate this information. But as an introduction, as an introductory phase of it, I wanted to just lay it out bare, literally, and have you interrogate it either starting today and continuing for the next 4 weeks. Now, I kept mentioning that this is a self-assessment tool as well as an auditing tool. There's an app that is being modified currently, but we are still using the Excel-based version of the app. What C-SAC does is it literally asks 20 questions. In each of the 5 categories, there are 4 questions, which we have just run through the headings for those questions, the subcategories for those questions. If I were to discuss with you the background to the app, what happens behind the scenes in the app, if I use an Excel-based example, which I've done a screen capture here. So if you're looking at a C-SAC assessment template for a predominantly cropping project, then when you look at the various categories of compliance that we're looking to evaluate, you're dealing with resource conservation, energy use, safety, biodiversity support, greenhouse gas reduction. In each of these categories, you have the 4 subcategories that I mentioned earlier. Now, at the core of C-SAC is a numerical scale that you're going to equate to your qualitative and quantitative answers. So that points column there, I'm going to show you how we arrive at the particular points. Each subcategory has a maximum of 5 points. If you were to score at the highest level in all of those categories, and then I put a score of 100, then we are talking about a level 5 in terms of the degree of compliance that can be ascribed to your climate smart agriculture project. Now, when I say it's an auditing tool, one can, with proper assessment, then compare competing projects in terms of how closely they comply with what would be seen as an ideal climate smart agriculture project that is comprehensive, that is not meant to be part of any greenwashing exercise, that is not singly focused on one aspect. And I think yesterday we beat the example to death about safe driving. In the same way that you cannot just improve one of your driving practices, you may improve the brakes that you're using on the car. But if you continue to drive in the same reckless manner, you can't see that you are now a certified safe driver because you just implemented one aspect of it. This is a comprehensive approach to climate smart agriculture that we're discussing. And as I discussed yesterday, one of the reasons why climate smart agriculture has lost favor, especially in some of the financial institutions, is because of this hodgepodge, unidimensional approach that we have taken to some of the climate smart agriculture projects. And this, what C-SAC is meant to do, and which is what I'm introducing now, and it will be the theme throughout the 5 weeks, is this comprehensive approach to it. And how do you measure how comprehensive it is? By looking at the type of assigned points that a project, a product, or a process can amass if subjected to this type of interrogation, this type of analysis. So that the level one would be 40 to 50 points, because what it says is that if you cannot score 40 points on this scale, you really do not have a climate smart agriculture project. If you have consistently attain less than 2 marks in each of these categories, and your cumulative score is 40 or less, then really, by this rubric, you're not really participating in a climate smart agriculture project. And then we have gradations that go on from 2 to 3 to level 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. 5 will be 80 to 100. As I said, I'm rushing through it just so that you get a flavor for it. And when we get to the question and answer session, after Christian has done his presentation, then we'll be able to get into the details. But this is what happens at the back of the app. So the Excel-based version of the app quite simply just gives you a scale, a rating scale, a mechanism to quantitatively address what aspect of the subcategory you're looking at. I think what I've done here in the screen capture is to look at nutrients, and what would happen in the background of the app is that you will be provided with a possible rating scale. So if for the entire project, you're only using inorganic fertilizers, as you see there under 1, then that would be the points ascribed to that project. And you go on varying degrees of complexity and compliance all the way up to what you would offer 5 marks for. So that if one was to comply, literally comply with the ideal or close to ideal situation for each of these subcategories, then one would end up with a perfect score of 100, which has so far been unattainable. This app has been in use for the last 4 years, and the closest we have come to a completely climate smart agriculture compliant project was my analysis of Kent Farms in Trinidad. For those of you based in Trinidad, we know Kent Farms is an aquaponics project, well, not a project, a producing farm. And that was the closest we ever got to a level 5, a top scale level 5 compliance in climate smart agriculture analysis using the system. Other systems have come pretty close. I mean, a level 3 compliance is really, really spectacular. So, you know, we ought not to snub a level 3, but if you can't at least attain level 1, then in our opinion, your project is not really climate smart. And as I said, this is a tool that farmers have used on their farms, right? You can do this self-analysis, but in terms of the auditing, if it's going to be audited for some of the projects that we're rolling out now, where we're going to have differential pricing based on the C-SAC quality auditing, then clearly that would have to be done by an independent assessor. Because I mean, in a situation like that, you wouldn't want to literally trust the producer to, you know, give himself a rating of 5 for power use, a rating of 5 for transportation, etc., which cannot be then verified. So the auditing end of it requires that kind of external input, but as a self-assessment tool for you to realize where you stand in the general flow of things, then as a handheld mobile app, you could stay on your farm and, you know, having access to the information, just go through and rate yourself. And then rate yourself the next crop and see if you've been making any kinds of improvements, and see if you can tie that, to show that you can tie that to increase productivity, which is one of the outcomes that we're looking for when we talk about climate smart agriculture. So as I said, I want to give you a little teaser, literally, and we will have the next couple of weeks to really interrogate this information in detail. I thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Steve, for the presentation. Let me just remind those who joined us late that each presenter, Steve is gone first, will present for 20 minutes, and then on completion of the presentations, we will have the question and answer session. So let me introduce the second presenter for the morning, Christian Fleming from the CARDI office in So Kit's leaders. Kirsten has been employed at the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute as a climate change and development specialist since September 2016. He works at the intersection of climate change science, food security, and the development of smallholder farmers and rural livelihoods. He is particularly interested in the interdisciplinary and participatory methods and approaches to confronting complex issues resulting from both the biophysical impacts of climate change and the socioeconomic environments in which people exist. Currently, Kirsten is involved in research seeking to answer questions of how best to design, deliver, and utilize climate information services to support decision making and innovation among farming communities. I now hand over to Kirsten Fleming. Kirsten, you have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, colleagues and all attendees. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to deliver this presentation. This time, I just want to share my screen and jump right into my presentation. What I want to do this morning is to, in support of the introduction to the topic, is to take a slightly different but related angle to what the previous presenter gave us. Greg, if you could allow me to share my screen. See my screen?
Yeah, I'm seeing your screen.
Okay, good. Thank you. At the inception of well, perhaps before I start my my presentation, let me just give a small backdrop of where I left off yesterday, and that's really with regards to giving a timeline, so to speak, of climate smart agriculture from CARDI's perspective in the Caribbean, looking at some of the key intervention areas and the dialogue and areas of focus that has taken place with regards to climate smart agriculture over the years. And we looked at technological, well, before technological, some of the advocacy work that we have done together with our partners right through the region and internationally, beginning with the idea and the topic of protected agriculture as one of the technological options that could afford us some adaptation as well as mitigation to climate change. Then we looked at plant genetic resources and its role in terms of affording us planting material that could offer some resilience towards climate change. Before that, we looked at the issue of water resource management, very important, and that's something that we would hear a lot more in the rest of the presentations to come. We also look at pest and disease management, that being also a key area of focus within the climate smart agriculture approach. And then we looked at things like family farming, recognizing that the family as a unit has an important place to play in terms of agriculture in the region and this whole notion of going climate smart. That really was the crux of my my presentation. Some of the things that we ended up the discussions later on had to do with the mechanisms that are in place within the region to allow us to be able to get information fed from the grassroots level at the farm level up into institutions and governments to help with our decision making. I'm going to touch on that a little bit this morning, but again in a different sense, though related. At the onset of the climate smart agriculture approach, one of the things that was always intended was for agriculture for there to be a level of transformation and reorientation of the agricultural systems, given that despite if we were to have drastic cuts in emissions right now, there is still a level of climate change and its associated impacts that is locked into the climate system. So even if we were to cut emissions now drastically, we could expect a certain degree of change to take place within our climate systems, as well as the impacts that will come with that. And for that reason, transformational changes were always highlighted as one of the key message under climate smart agriculture. If we consider especially the Caribbean outlook, there's a general warming in temperatures that is anticipated. The number of dry days between rain events is increasing, as well as the rain events themselves tend to be heavier, more like a downpour. If you imagine taking a bucket of water and throwing it, dashing it on your plant, as opposed to a trickle or a showering that we are somewhat familiar to in the past, as well as an increase in the intensity and frequency of hurricanes as well as drought events. So if we bear this in mind and we think about the adaptation and the changes on a whole that we need to be looking at, one of the points I want to raise and one of the things that we've recognized working in this area is that many of the climate smart or label climate smart agriculture interventions tend to consist of incremental changes, small changes, and really the underlying those incremental and small changes is somewhat of a holding on to the status quo, the system as we know it, and avoiding major disruptions to these systems. But we tend to do so with not enough thought towards or concerning the projected climate and the changes that will take place as I presented in the previous slide. So for example, we spoke a lot about water management projects. I'll stay away from that term for this example and say many of these water security projects that you tend to see are going wrong tend to aim at enhancing the resilience of the communities. And we see different examples of that. Some that focus on collecting water and for use through drip irrigation technology, others that pay attention to recycling by itself. But without going into detail as to how the shape of that project, one thing that tend to remain the same is this neglect, or at least not enough consideration again as to the projected changes that have been indicated for the Caribbean region. So you have these water projects that tend to fail to account for the variability and the slow drying that is projected when we are talking about rainfall, for example. So you have these water projects that are being built. They are nice in some respects, but over it all, there is this, a poor consideration for the fact that in the future, the rainfall, the characteristics of the rainfall that we are seeing today even will be quite different. And I believe that the time will come, and perhaps has already come, when even the best water management projects alone by themselves will not be enough. And really there is a need for more dialogue and more approaches towards a changing of the system and the ideas and the concepts and how our interventions look towards areas that we haven't yet considered before. One of the things I often say is the climate change as it is has been labeled unprecedented. It's not things that we've seen before that are taking place right before our eyes. And therefore, to some extent, some of our interventions and our changes really need to be different to what we have considered before. Really need to have unprecedentedness in its own respect. And I have a technological example of when we are thinking about water and its impact on agriculture and agriculture production, is confining our, this is one example that I've seen done elsewhere in the world, confining appropriate production to specific climate windows. When we do have projected changes in rainfall, we have considered those. But beyond that, that we begin to start looking at investments in storing more food, at multiple diverse food storage strategies, as well as moving our production to favorable areas. In some cases, some countries have moved their production and their investment to outside of their country, recognizing their vulnerability and the projected changes that have been anticipated for their context. The challenge, however, whether it's an example like that or others, when thinking about transformational changes, is to ensure our agricultural systems look like this. The fact is that change and more so our agricultural systems are complex systems. They aren't just concerned about the biophysical realities, the climate system by itself. It isn't simply concerning the plants by themselves, but it involves people. And what people do and what they don't do, what they practice and don't practice, goes beyond the biophysical realities that they face. And oftentimes they include softer, non-tangible issues related to things, for example, like relationships, self-efficacy. So even if they have the information before them and they have cases of where adaptation and transformational changes work, at the same time, it speaks to them doing it and them implementing it. And so there is a level of self-efficacy and perception concerning that. And as well as the environment that supports these changes that they may in fact want to make, but cannot because of the environment, the supportive environment that is lacking around them. Knowledge drives transformational changes and not merely technical information. And Steve gave an example yesterday of this, his early encounters in agriculture, dealing and extension and dealing with a farmer who they were on their way to address this particular, I believe it was a pest or disease challenge. And right next to the farmer in his car was an informational fact sheet that gives solutions and advice on that particular problem. But by itself, it wasn't enough. And knowledge really is something that needs to be derived not simply through educational experiences where there is one person having all the information and passing that down to someone else and expecting them to make changes. Another example that I give is that if we were to have someone to come and tell us to paint our homes in a different color because it's been proven to reduce the heat or repel a particular pest. It's not necessarily that we're going to make those changes based on that information by itself. And that really needs to come through something that Steve has been throwing around quite a lot and saying since this workshop has started, is that information needs to become part of this person, almost inherent and tacit in this person, and that comes through learning experiences. Transformational learning lead to personal and practical changes, so that the transformational changes that we want to see around us when we're talking about climate smart agriculture really need to come through a lens of transformational learning, and that is, I believe, is quite innovative, and to some extent new to our systems, our institutional systems around the region, but I believe is one of the areas that we need to be thinking about a lot. But I want to put all of that in the context of one of our key focus in this webinar series, and that is with regards to the notion and the idea of looking at compliance and complying with what is truly climate smart. Considering those things that I mentioned before, could we, I want to pose a question here as I end, is that could we use the pursuit, could we leverage the pursuit of climate smart agriculture compliance to create a learning opportunity in which we consider, yes, the technological side of things, but also the social side of things, so that when we are asking these questions and putting this tool to effective use, that we do also take into account the technological, the biophysical side of things, but also those things that tend to be deep and not necessarily on the surface, with regards to how transformational change takes place in people as well as in practice. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Before we go into the question and answer session, let me remind the participants about registering. You can either place your question in the question and answer chat, or you can raise your hands and you will be called to put your question to the panel or the presenters. The presentation continued on from yesterday with reintroductions and pointers from what happened and what was presented yesterday. There's some things that I think as the moderator I want to put to the participants. And one of which I found very interesting yesterday is that to be climate smart compliant requires a comprehensive approach. It requires cost, it requires investment. And I know Steve mentioned it yesterday, what is going to be the price differential of products coming out of these farming systems? One of the failures of the organic production system, especially at the local level, was the limited price differential offered to the farmer. And it can't be price differential only for export, it has to be price differential at the local market level. Kirsten raised some very important points, the practicality of them. For instance, climate windows, using weather patterns to produce. As somebody who's a kind of a Viking farmer, to me that can be risky, especially with the kind of weather patterns that are not necessarily going according to the forecast. So we need to talk a little about that. The interest now, as Kirsten brought out, and probably didn't articulate it that way, cross-border investments. This is something I know CARDI's subsidiary consultancy company, Cash, has been looking at. So if you don't have the kind of weather patterns in your country, you can go to a country and do the relevant negotiations for the production system. So it's not only looking at biological and environmental systems in your country, but you can sort that elsewhere. So with these words, I now open the floor for what I expect to be a very interesting question and answer session. So over to the participants and the presenters. Okay, there's a question in the chat. Can you elaborate on the use of plant genetic resources? Are there any current breeding projects in the Caribbean to develop climate resilient crop varieties? That's a question I put to the
let me steal
of any of the panelists.
let me steal some of Christian's thunder, because I think CARDI may be modest to claim the type of breakthroughs they've had. One of the unpaid promotions I've done for CARDI over the years is to talk about the work with climate analogs. Climate analogs would be countries or environments where they are currently experiencing the type of climate change impacts that we foresee for ourselves. And I was lucky enough to have written the root crop project, the CFC root crop project that CARDI implemented for a number of years. And out of that came the transfer of genetic resources from the Pacific to the region. And that has been one of the major success stories in terms of germplasm incorporation into a more climate sensitive crop production pattern. So I wanted to say that before Christian, because I didn't want it to sound as if CARDI was boasting about itself. You know, I prefer if somebody outside of CARDI makes that first claim, and turn it over to Christian now, who is actively involved in this type of research.
Thank you, Steve.
I hope my check is in the mail, because I mean,
Sure.
Years, yeah.
And just to come on the heels of what Steve said, and well said, another thing there is that we've recognized that to some extent the germplasm or the plant, the varieties, the species, the plant material right around us, whether that is some of those that we are using, but many of them are not being used. The mere fact that they are around today, given a number of the changes that we've seen, the climate has seen over the years, does speak to some level of adaptability, inherent adaptability within crops, animals, also. So a key priority, or a key area is really identifying this plant material that is of economic relevance and importance for us. Getting that collected and, you know, identifying and trying to come up with what characterizes these plant material, and then ensuring that we have it conserved in different forms available for farmers, and yes, under some evaluations, as Steve already mentioned. So a lot of our work has been on characterization. Our moderator, Greg Robin, has done quite a lot of work in terms of characterization of our, especially roots and tubers, which by themselves offer a great level of tolerance, being of their very nature, the type of crops they really are. I know some of the work that we perhaps might see, and that really came out of this project that is hosting this webinar series, is some crop modeling, looking at modeling work, looking at how these planting material and genetic resources that we have stand up to the projected climate systems, and running those things through mathematical models to really get, again, more information about the planting material. There's a lot more that could be said, but I imagine that we would hear more and leave more for the rest of the presenters throughout the series.
Yes, Steve.
Can I just reiterate the work of the moderator? Greg has been on, on the International Root Crops panel and so on. We're familiar with the amount of work that he did. But another thing too is that, as much as I agree with Christian that we are looking for transformational agriculture, I am one of those people who always feel that we are always reinventing what we had before. When I hear all the fancy terms, composting and vermiculture and so, and soil regeneration, stuff that our foreparents would have done. So as much as I know that we need to have a transformational agriculture, I'm saying that there are going to be stepping stones towards that. And some of those stepping stones will have to be modification of techniques that we're already familiar with, whether it be composting, whether it be germ conservation. I mean, you know, long before these genes, help me, have an IP moment, interacted these protected terminator genes. Long before terminator genes, we knew about keeping germplasm, right? We didn't have to, no one was going to buy seed every crop, right? So that all those practices, germplasm banks, all of those practices are going to have to come back as part under the rubric, under the easily funded rubric, I might add, of climate smart agriculture. So as much as I agree with you, Christian, that transformation doesn't have to be by one single leap. It could be, some incremental steps. But I agree with you that we do need a transformed agricultural sector. That's not a debate.
I will leave the very important work CARDI has done in taro, dashi, and sweet potato. As very recently, we did some work with UE Hazel, with Dr. Angela Aline, and we came up with some great results. So the webinar was done last year. So, but that will be done in the root and tuber crop session, where we will use the compliance format and process to show what CARDI has done and some other agencies. There's a comment in the chat which that's from Risa. I'm new at the CARDI Barbados unit, just joined as a plant breeder. So probably this Risa can appear and make some more. I'll get in contact with her and see how we can get some insights from her for the crop sessions. All right, and things of that nature. She also said as a follow-up, thanks for your responses. Follow-up, where can I go to find out more about the characterization of plant varieties from CARDI? Well, that's a really internal matter. Can I get in contact with Greg? Sure you can. Are there any current characterization projects? There may be, I can't say yes or no. My contact is asked. So at least we seen scientists the need for networking. And even though I'm outside of the CARDI system, I'm still working as a consultant. So there shouldn't be any problem getting information. Any questions?
Yes, hands, I think. Right.
Yeah, there's also a question from Leticia, I believe, with regards to greenwashing.
I don't see that in the question and answer. Sure. Okay, right. What is it referring to greenwashing? I know Steve made mention of that yesterday. My apologies if it was mentioned yesterday. Yes, it was, since I did not participate. Well, Steve, please, can you elaborate a little on this greenwashing for the participants, especially those who were not there yesterday?
It is a term that first surfaced, if you like, during the first set of moves with hotels and so to green their establishments. As I said, I spent a number of years as a Green Globe consultant. Green Globe is the environmental standards that hotels use. And sometimes a clever hotelier would come up with an idea, something that sounds green, let me just give you an example. I'm sure most of you would have been familiar with the era when you went to a hotel and they would tell you, if you want to protect the environment and cut down on the amount of detergent and so, reuse your towels, right? Don't put your towels on the floor, leave them hanging up. And then in that way, you'll be contributing to, reduce pollution in the environment and so. So that there were some genuine attempts at greening, but in the cases where the attempts weren't really bona fide, the term greenwashing came up. And we are using it in the agricultural sector to refer to projects that appear to be climate smart. In other words, they get funded under the rubric of climate smart agriculture. And as I said, at the risk of beating this example to death, but it is the most prevalent one, you know, we have seen projects being funded that were described as water harvesting projects. Just because, and I say this without any fear of regret, just because some fool found a way to harvest rainwater or something, and then proceeded to store it and use it in the same irresponsible manner as they were using the water before this fancy harvesting. So that would be an aspect of greenwashing. When you have clever consultants like myself who can design projects that appear green, that appear to be, you know, environmentally sound, but they're really just putting a plaster over. So that, in effect, is what greenwashing is about. And it is because of that I shouldn't say because of that, but that has contributed to CSA being, you know, sidelined by a number of funding agencies because they don't see it as something comprehensive, as something that is going to provide a genuinely green, a genuinely eco-friendly project or product. I hope it wasn't too long, but that's really. Yeah.
There's another question. Good day. Is climate smart agriculture being promoted to be part of the region agricultural school programs?
Could you repeat that, Greg? I'm not sure.
Is climate smart agriculture being promoted to be part of the regional agricultural schools? I would imagine that they're talking about the curriculum in the schools.
Yes, I can speak for just about two or three countries. I mean, where I am resident here in Grenada, it is the official approach of the government, of the ministry. And there's a specific project here called SIAP, and I'm not too sure if there are any SIAP attendees, but this is a climate smart agriculture project that is an IFAD funded project, and they have been promoting and singularly focused on climate smart agriculture.
But I would imagine that the CXC,
the curriculum
programs with adoption of the climate smart, hopefully they would adopt the art.
Yeah. Well, we wait and see. We wait and see. But I know that SLAFI and some of the other youth organizations have, you know, have incorporated it in what they're doing.
Let me go back to the chart. There are more questions. The C-SAC tool, is it very similar to the global analytical framework of agroecology being developed by FAO? I know there's a project that CARDI is working on with FAO where surveys were conducted. And that question is asked by Dorian Atia, the CARDI representative who is actually working on that project or worked on that project.
Well, back in 2016 when C-SAC was developed and trademarked and registered, there was nothing comparable on the scene at the time. So I'm not sure if subsequently, you know, there may have been other approaches that come close or are similar, but I'm not in a position to respond comprehensively on that. But I know that at the time it was it was a trademarked approach that did not have any identifiably comparable processes.
All right. There's another question here. Are schools encouraging student research projects in climate smart agriculture that can be used within the region?
Again, because of my limited exposure post-COVID, you know, I'm not sure in the last couple of years, you know, what has been going on outside of Grenada and possibly Trinidad. But one of the things I can assure attendees, I don't know if anybody from Y-Farm is attending, but there's an operation project out of Trinidad started by Alpha Senon that, you know, really incorporates a lot of these climate smart agriculture initiatives, and it is aimed at the next generation of feeders, as Alpha refers to them, you know. So these are the people who are going to feed us in 2050 when a lot of us are going to be soil ameliorants.
Greg, allow me to make a contribution. I think one of the things that we've seen in some of our units across the region that are slightly related is that oftentimes we have schools, whether it's through the teachers or the students directly, come into the CARDI units and come into our farms or research stations. Really, they may not necessarily, use the term climate smart agriculture, but they really come in with a sense of the idea of enhancing resilience or research projects that are centered around resilience, recognizing that it needs to be done in such a way that is environmentally responsible. And at the end of the day, it makes economical sense, which is really some of the major tenets of kind of smart agriculture. So apart from the CXA curriculum, we are seeing it directly through the schools in different cases around our units. So yeah.
I haven't trained Christian well enough, Christian, where did all this modesty come from? I mean, you have not mentioned your project in St. Kitts. I was fortunate enough to have been in St. Kitts when Christian working with schools were looking at containerized culture. And so come on, Christian, don't chinks.
Yeah.
Let us, he's been a lot more involved than he's letting on.
I've deliberately, it's deliberate, more than you know. I've deliberately kept away from the containerized, but it is, and because I have a session to do on protected agriculture.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, so that's something that we could look forward to. But yeah, I'm not trying to be modest in that regard, at least.
But I think we're coming down to the functional part. There's a question that just came up, and so we seen that there's a lot of attention about schools, curriculum, and that has impact on policy and university, because climate smart, as Professor Taylor said, is here to stay. There's another question here. How does one determine the most appropriate tool to assess climate smart agriculture transformation? So apparently, while you may have a concept and a tool and an app, there may be other methods that are available. I'm not saying that they're competing methods, but that's a question asked. How does one determine the most appropriate tool to assess climate smart transformation?
I don't. Yes, I think that's a valid question. I cannot answer it in the sense that I cannot provide a yes or no answer. All I can say is that coming out of my representation of the Caribbean in Durban in 2011 at COP, where agriculture was not even on the agenda for the Conference of the Parties discussion there in Durban, we, in collaboration with our South African partners, actually got agriculture onto the radar of the people there. And at that time, there was no comprehensive climate smart agriculture approach. And it's out of that we kept working on, and back in 2016 we came up with this tool. So that if there are other mechanisms, that can offer training, certification, and auditing, then I mean I think that's a good place to be. If the choice was between not competing tools but comparable tools, then I think the region would be better off for it. I don't see C-SAC as a magic bullet or anything like that. So I think there's room for all kinds of certification systems. I was lucky enough to be associated with Fair Trade. When Flow had their Fair Trade system, everybody managed to comply with that, and it was linked to financial rewards, so it worked. I think that is going to be the proof of the pudding. When we get differential pricing for different degrees of compliance, I think that's when we're going to literally separate the sheep from the other non-ruminants, from the other ruminants.
Greg, if I could comment as well, beneath that, my presentation was really the, in addition to what C-SAC currently looks like, and the questions and those areas that Steve highlights is also this notion of the projected system. And I agree fully with the need in many cases for small changes and stepping stones that we need to make, of course. But also any back of that, at the back of that, also taken into account, because we want small changes that make sense with regards to what's projected. Because to some extent, we don't want to build things that we are locked into, that we create a path in which, this I made all this investment in this particular direction. And then you have a change in rainfall patterns, especially, which is particularly relevant for the agriculture sector, that we haven't considered. So together with our, major changes, our small changes, incremental changes, I think the point I was making is that there's need to be some consideration with regards to, yes, after all and with all and before all in some cases, these incremental changes. What are some of the things that we need to change systemically with regards to agriculture? I can't think of, similar to Steve, I can't think of a tool that exists by itself, but I know there are several frameworks that are out there, at least in academia, that looks at what constitutes or what is behind transformational changes, especially at the level of the person who is going to make those changes, and taking those into account, as practitioners, as researchers and scientists.
I just want to make one comment that this compliance process is raising the bar for the small farmers and medium in terms of intellect and science and technology and cost for technology adoption and adaptation. I'm going back to the chat, and there's an anonymous attendee, and it's a pretty lengthy comment or question. Would you agree that one of the strategies that can be used to reduce the environmental impact of agriculture is to reduce agriculture itself in terms of lowering the amount of meat we consume globally, thus lowering the production of meat, that will lower the amount of forest being cleared for creation of grassland, and to lower the use of crops to feed animals, and also to lower methane production from ruminants and the waste produced by these animals. Also, should we focus on recycling human fecal matter on a household basis by developing safe and efficient recycling systems that can be installed at homes and communities to convert this organic waste into usable fertilizers for plants in a safe and environmentally friendly manner? Pretty lengthy, but
can I take a stab?
Right.
Can I take a stab at that? I have heard and empathize with and understand a lot of the sentiments expressed, especially those having to do with livestock production. But as someone who was a standard bearer, a flag waver in the organic movement, I can tell you that when you go to people like Andrew Roy, Greg, I know you know exactly who I'm referring to, right? When you look at the people who I have done as the real champion organic farmers in this part of the world, and every one of them will tell you, whenever they see an organic farmer without animals on their farm, they get very worried because they feel that, something is missing there in that whole operation. Now, I understand the concern about cutting down grassland. I also, from a nutritional point of view, I understand the concerns about raising livestock, but when you look at nutritive value, right? I am not one of those people who think that you can reduce agriculture by scaling it away from animal production, but at the level of eggs, poultry, or all the way up to your large ruminants, which have been blamed for a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions. And if you notice, two of the aspects of C-SAC has to do with enteric fermentation. That's all that fermentation that takes place in the guts of ruminants, the source of all these nitrogenous greenhouse gases. And there are feeding FWDING, feeding protocols, use of ionophobes, and so I mean technical stuff that the livestock people can get into that will reduce that greenhouse emission load, which is often counterbalanced in our types of societies by the greenhouse gases coming from our waste disposal sites that aren't properly linked to biogas production, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm agreeing that there is a concern about animal agriculture, but I can assure the anonymous attendee that, I mean, these factors have been considered, and I don't think anytime soon we are going to be looking at removing animal production out of the agricultural landscape. And as far as the fecal, the use of human waste, I mean, there have been numerous studies on that. I mean, I wouldn't prefer to be an expert on it, but I'm telling you that the information is there in academia and so on. You know, and a lot of the Asian episodes of the use of human feces as a source of organic material. I don't know if Christian wants to
start. Let's leave that there. I think it's well said. Yeah.
Okay. Questions. We have a lot of questions to address.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this question because I find it interesting, and it's not in the order, but is C-SAC a step further than organic farming?
Is C-SAC what, sorry?
Is it a step further than organic farming?
I wouldn't say so, because just like I didn't want to drift into this, but just like organic farming has to be certified externally, I have some issues with organic farming as practice, even in the US, because when you look at a climate smart production process, there are organic farms where manure, waste, is transported hundreds of miles using fossil fuels to deposit it on a farm to be able to comply with, you know, the strict organic guidelines that the US operates under. So I'm suggesting that it is not going beyond organic. I'm saying that some organic operations will fall nicely into C-SAC certification and get very, very, very high ratings. And then there are others, especially as practiced elsewhere. I'm not talking about what Jome does or what Gome does, you know, in the region. I'm talking about as practice in large commercial organic farms that may not make the cut with C-SAC. But in terms of our organic production, yeah, we are generally a low emissions agriculture region, you know. And this is what the Ag-Ready project that I'm just giving a plug for ICA here, the Ag-Ready project that is being rolled out, it's a readiness grant that ICA is managing in 6 countries, looks at the basis of these assertions that I'm making about it being a low emissions agriculture. So they're actually going to do the MRV protocols, the monitoring, recording, validation. So in time to come, without sounding like a calypsonian, in time to come, we'll be able to slot that in nicely. But it is not meant to be taken organic to another level or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that. It is just that some organic operations will definitely get high marks in a C-SAC.
Any comments on that, Christian? No?
No. Let's take the other questions, Greg.
Okay. Is Climate Smart Fund self-assessment tool only for crops? What about animals, fish farming? Where can we assess this tool?
As it can work, and if you remember in my presentation, I mentioned that the highest rating was an aquaponics project in Freeport in Trinidad, but it is the utility can be shown for cropping projects, livestock projects, mixed projects. That screenshot I gave you of the Excel-based app has a separate sheet that deals with mixed cropping, with a mixed farming, and it deals with ruminant production as well. It has not been designed to do a strictly aquaculture project, because there'll be other issues in terms of land use and so, that may have to be factored in. As presently constructed, it has not been designed to deal with aquaculture projects or with fisheries or with marine fisheries, right? Land-based operations, whether it be mixed farming or livestock farming or very intensive battery type poultry production, all of it can be factored in terms of, I hope I'm not telling tales out of school, but the latest state of the Jamaican climate, I think that's the title for the report. I mean, Dale will probably be able to help me here. But we use C-SAC to identify some of the climate risk reduction potential of C-SAC. As I said, maybe if Dale is on, he could add some more to it. But the tool is in fact capable of doing mixed cropping or direct cropping or intensive livestock production.
Very briefly, are there any provisions or intentions to engage the private sector? The reasons for asking is that there are players in the market who have the technology.
What technology is that?
Well, it didn't expound or extrapolate or give any details on the technology, so that's kind of vague.
I know we have right on this call. I saw he made a comment earlier. We have some greenhouse applications that are coming out of Tobago, for example, that with protected agriculture in mind, that able to withstand hurricane conditions. There isn't enough, I think, engagement with the private sector on the whole, with regards to us going climate smart and climate smart agricultural approaches. But there are engagement with the private sector in terms of enhancing the resilience of the agriculture sector on a whole. I am familiar or have experience with, I can't remember the name of the company now. They're actually based in Grenada, with regards to the same protected agriculture system I've been working with. They are the ones who have quite interestingly developed some of the sensors that monitor the environment inside of these control environments, that would allow us to do some level of automation. So, and I believe there are examples elsewhere that we have the private sector, the supermarkets that we've been working with, that not necessarily with the technology, but we do have recognizing that at the end of the day, we do want products to reach our supermarket shelves and our retailers. And I know we have done a lot of work with that in that regard, working together with the retailers to ensure that the interventions that we are making in the agriculture sector, at the end of the day, the products reach the consumers. Those are the two things that's come to mind.
Okay, there's another interesting question here from Carlos. It's, many times we build climate smart agriculture interventions for project interest, but they are not sustainable. It keeps requiring investments to maintain it, which is something I keep saying. Can you show us one intervention that is not so? If not, we have non-sustainable models, and we are more dependent on institutions for funding than the CSA models. So in other words, there's a concern here about the investment for sustaining these models? And can you show or give examples, as the question is here? Can you show us one intervention that is not costly or requiring investments and stuff like that?
I had a different take on the question. I thought it was one that would be sustainable, even if it had a high initial cost. I thought that was the question. I could handle that in terms of high investment cost, but sustainable in the long run. I mean, there are examples of that.
You can elaborate on that one, the example you want to give.
But some of the systems, some of the more intricate systems, you know, once you start talking protected agriculture and so, may have high initial investment costs. Yeah, high initial investment costs for non-renewable energy as well. But it's whether it is sustainable and whether the cost-benefit analysis works out appropriately. I mean, those I can answer. We have examples of those all over the Caribbean. You know, I have colleagues and farmers and so all over the Caribbean who are running successful farms based on the application of what would fall under the rubric of climate smart agriculture.
But may I also suggest to the participants that if your questions are not adequately answered, you can send your questions to the Maury Center and they will be answered by the respective scientists or presenters as we go through the weeks of presentation. Okay, Christian, you're going to say something?
Yeah. And the other take with that question, and is, again, Carlos, thank you for the question. I think is a relevant concern. Beyond climate smart agriculture, there is a sense in which a number of projects start and then when it's finished, there isn't sustainability, continuity. And I want to purport that isn't necessarily just because of the money that is involved. Because you do have modest interventions, you do have interventions that aren't necessarily costly, that have been done, but at the end of the day, it hasn't been something that is sustained. So I also want to put in response to that question that it isn't necessarily always about money. Yes, to some extent, there is the investment cost that at some point there's a recognition that is unattainable for it to be sustained. But also we do have cases where, yes, it was sustained, the modest interventions, whether it's in terms of combining the use of tolerant planting material together with good water management practices that is supported by climate information systems. We have cases like that around the region, coming out of Jamaica, coming out of St. Lucia. We had a recent one in St. Lucia that was nominated by FAO for climate smart agriculture. I don't want to say compliance, but recognizing its contribution to climate smart agriculture. But we also see that even with those same interventions, low reaching planting material that's available in country, water resource management strategies available again in country right around us. It's not being sustained. And in my presentation, I made mention that some of the reasons behind what we practice and don't practice goes beyond simply economic, sometimes beyond the technology, and has to do sometimes with things that we often don't talk a lot about in agriculture, and that's the people themselves, with regards to the change that they need time to go through, to experience themselves before these things are sustained. And in some cases, it's not to say it's a failed attempt, because you do have, they may not be complete or immediate adoption, but in some sense, adaptation takes time and in its own respect, cycles in terms of which people make sense of things. Is this wood something that I put on my farm? And it may take some other reality to really bring across, hey, I really need to consider this water management strategy. in this year at this time. So I really think it needs to be a bit more comprehensive. It sometimes more comprehensive and more factors involved in these unsustainable projects.
Colleagues, we have about 10 to 15 more minutes, but we have quite a few questions. So I think I'm going to ask the presenters to keep the questions and comments brief. And I'm also going to ask the participants to keep their questions and comments brief. And I'm going to also ask the presenters to be a bit brief in their responses. This comes from Dorian Rowan Campbell. I'm a certified organic farmer and have been since 2002, but I use chicken manure from approved egg farmers. My own farm is at 4,000 feet and is very steep and only suited to raising rabbits to make that perfect use and the recycled surplus. I don't know, Steve, you want to, that's like a comment, but you want to say something to that briefly?
In response to my comment about organic farms not having livestock on them, it wasn't meant to be an exclusive comment. It was just, I was just repeating what people like Andrew here and Sue would have said over the years. Sorry.
Right. Okay. These are some comments.
Yeah, I see we have a number of comments from Josiah.
Yeah.
But we really have a question from Kenrick. Kenrick Witty.
Yeah. Let me just mention that adopting climate smart agriculture is a good thing for the Caribbean in an attempt to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and contribute toward food security. Okay, that supports what we're trying to say. Question, do you think that the more developed countries who are more responsible for climate change are doing enough to reduce or reverse the effects of climate change currently? Jason, you want to take a stab at that?
There's a short answer, no.
Yeah.
No, all right.
I suppose he wasn't looking necessarily for the short answer, but I would say no, there's more that could be done, given it's I mean, there's all aspects around this, aspect of justice, social justice, and many other aspects. So no.
I went to the chart and I just saw this brief comment. Transformational changes are not just with farmers, but also with farm workers.
And institutions.
Yeah.
And multiple other levels, if we are looking at the system and systemic changes.
But while the questions come in, I don't see any other movement, no question. I just want to put to the panelists for the benefit of the participants. How do you see this comprehensive approach unfolding on the ground? Because a lot of the participants are now asking for examples. If you read the comments and the questions between the lines, they're seeking, not only justification and clarification, but hard examples of what you're talking about. And it also suggests to us that the future presenters should not only be operating from a principled position and a logistical position, but they should also give clear examples. And Steve, as the coordinator of this webinar sessions, you may want to say that to some of the presenters, that they have to give where possible, give clear examples of what you're talking about. And on that basis, I want to just ask a very simple question on behalf of the participants. Is the integrated crop production system more likely to be climate
I mean, it's not agriculture compliant.
Yeah, is it more likely to be climate compliant?
I don't think my experience based over the last probably something years is enough to answer that. I can only tell you what I have seen, you know. A lot of the really successful ones in this new era, this new dispensation where we're looking at emissions and energy use and so, the aquaponics projects are the ones that seem to be, you know, at the top of the scale. Those of you who have the time, please look at the Petit Martinique Women's Action Group aquaponics project in Petit Martinique. Those are closer to Trinidad and think could take a look at what Kent Farms is doing in aquaculture. You heard from a farmer yesterday in terms of what one aspect, one introduction of a climate smart agriculture feature can mean in terms of greater productivity. Just the addition of a shredder chipper to your farm as part of your investment in nutrient recycling can make a hell of a difference. So there aren't that many that I know of really picture perfect examples, you know, outside of the aquaponics, you know, where everything is totally contained and, you know, there's no nutrient leakage and or organic type operation like what, again, bringing in my late dear friend Roy used to manage. So that there are examples out there of not the transformational type thing that Christian is talking about. I'm not privy to too many of those, but I've seen protected agriculture systems that generate lots and lots of revenue after rather minimal outlays. And I'm talking about, I'm basing this on my experience. When CARICOM had that IRTA project in Jamaica, there was a training program on protected agriculture. I was lucky enough to be asked to be the adoption, to lecture on the adoption practices and so. And I can tell you that out of that intervention alone, there are a number of protected agriculture operations that are making a lot of money because they cite it properly. You know, they're above 500, whatever the criteria are. So that there are examples out there of people spectacularly, you know, unlike most farmers, not broadcasting that they're making good revenue, but there are examples out there. And I think Christian has used some. I have used some in terms of aquaponics and so on. And I can assure you that the other presenters are going to be coming with their own examples of salt tolerant varieties, that the type of cassava production we have in Trinidad and so on. I said, I leave that to the root crop people, but there are examples out there. So this is not pie in the sky stuff. That's the point I'm making.
I think we have time for about 2 more questions. So I'm going back to the Q&A chat. Are there any interventions to engage in partnerships with the private sector players who have access to the technology and understanding the implementation and rollout of the technology? Reasons being, there are companies that can be partnered with to implement and do model farms where the technology can actually be exhibited. There is an absence of the use of data collection and data analysis. That's basically what we've been talking about.
I tackled that with the AgReady project. I'm telling you that the reasons why I have been so upset over the last couple of years is that we are yet to have agriculture feature in the nationally determined contributions because we do not have the hard data out there. And as I said, this new AgReady project is going to assist with some of that because it is too easy for us to know what 1 acre of forest means in terms of carbon sequestration. Very few of us know what 1 acre of pigeon peas means in terms of carbon sequestration. And those are the kind of information that we need to be able to justify the funding that will come out of a green climate fund or similar GEF agency or similar global finance agency. So I'm saying that, you know, we're getting there.
But Steve, is it possible to give a sort of case study example towards the end of this 5-week session? Is it possible to because I think the audience, the participants, are looking for something tangible that they can feel. They can say, okay, but this is what we're missing to do in our situation. Can we develop a sort of case study,
Yeah, well,
and sort of present it towards the end or in the closing?
once you get the permission from the actual project owners or enterprise owners, then sure. But that would be, we'd have to negotiate that separately, because I've used Kent Farms and things with permission, because you told me I can use it, right? But you don't go about broadcasting people's projects, unless you have.
Okay, I'm going to ask, gentlemen, we're running out of time. And we're close to our allotted time, which takes us up to 12:30 PCT. So I'm going to ask the two presenters to give some closing remarks before I wrap up.
Let's go age before beauty, Christian.
Sure, man.
I just want to thank the 100 something attendees that put up with me for an hour and a half, and I hope that you tune up next week Tuesday as well. Christian?
Yeah. Greg, just to answer the question and closing remarks as well, is the cases that I've seen, a level of cognizance with regards to adaptability and environmental friendliness mitigation operations, at least where I'm here in St. Kitts and Nevis, is really where I have a lot of the experience, is operations that are really knowledge. These guys have researched themselves and found the information with regards to all that they do. How to compost, what does that look like? Collecting their own seeds, as Steve mentioned before, their water management practices, all those things are is a lot of times in groups, and at least one or two persons is responsible for getting that knowledge, and really speaks to the approach towards climate smart, which is really it being quite knowledge driven, experience and this thing. So with that, I want to thank the the participants for being here, their attention, and as well as for the opportunity to sit here and bring this presentation and discussion towards all of us. Thank you, and wish you all the best.
Let me thank the participants for a very interactive session. I think the question and answers will only refer to the chat, so we won't raise any hands today. I hope that the participants go home and, as the presenter said, give that the kind of thought process, so that when we come to the other sessions that deal with soil and water management next week and irrigation management, we can have a more in-depth and more functional discussion in terms of climate change and climate change compliance. So let me thank the organizers, the coordinators, our fellow panelists. I see Dion Clark Harris is still with us, and all the participants for a very interactive session. And I hope next week we come with some concrete ideas to help the coordinators move forward. Thank you very much.
Oh, Dr. Robin, before we go, I just want to remind the participants to ensure that they register, because by registering, you will receive all the content that is shared every week. So it's very important that you register. So if you have not yet done so before signing out, please click on the link and register. And thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Desi. So with that last comment from Deserina, we can consider this session closed, and I will see you next week. Thank you very much.